I was a student at Eureka College in Eureka, Illinois, and the last year or two that I was there, they had a professor come in who had worked directly with Reinhold Niebuhr in investigating lynchings. His name was Professor Kester, and he lived in Black Rock, North Carolina. Anyway, he recommended that I consider Vanderbilt Divinity School. So I came down to visit and loved it and applied and was accepted. That was in the fall of '59. And we had, in order to pay our way through, we worked in small churches on weekends. And fairly soon, I was involved in an automobile accident where a farmer turned across in front of me as I was driving up to church. And anyway, I broke my femur. So I was on crutches for 6 months. And during that period is when the sit-in started in Nashville, as I recall. And my friend, who was a year ahead of me in school, his dad was a minister who had spoken out about racial issues, and he was very sympathetic. And he was the one, I think, who actually went over to Fisk University and got involved. And he was designated as a spotter, a witness. And since I was on crutches, I was made one also, where we could go watch the sit-ins. And I was on crutches, nobody thought any more of me one way or the other. And I assumed the idea was if anything ever happened where you had to go to court and testify, there'd be a witness as to what really did happen. But anyway, that never materialized. But that was the beginning of going over and watching some of these on crutches. And I swear I cannot remember, but somehow out of that dynamic, I think it was the following year, in the fall, I was on the committee, the coordinating committee, and they made me the treasurer. I don't think it was an election or anything. I think he just wanted a white, visible representative. There was no particular honor involved. But I would go over to Fisk, 2 or 3 days a week over lunch hour, and we'd plan. Actually, they would plan, and I would be involved in it. The next set of demonstrations. And there was a local black church downtown, close to downtown, where everybody congregated. But that's where I got to meet and know the leaders of the Nashville movement, because that's where they were. They came out of Fisk and out of I think it was a Black Baptist seminary.
Okay.
That's where John Lewis came, for example. That's a good question. It just seemed the natural thing to do. I don't recall anymore. We just did it.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember having discussions with seminary students and how they all would argue they believed in the same principles, the same goals of the blacks, but they're going about it the wrong way. And it's like there is, that's when I realized liberals tend to have things pure rather than real.
Mm-hmm.
Before they're free to act, and you got to be careful with liberals. So anyway, I was not involved. I was only involved in one actual demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
It was a day where they had switched from going to 5 and 10, stores where they served in a row to where they were going to try to integrate a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the restaurant people were expecting us. They had hired bouncers. So when we got to the door of the restaurant, the bouncers had everything blocked. There were no visible police anywhere. And so we were just kind of stalemated right there in front of this restaurant. And some kid in the crowd said, "I'll hold him if somebody will hit him."
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, somebody came out and grabbed me by the arms from behind. And I just kind of went limp, and he apparently wasn't very, because we both fell to the ground. And then a plainclothesman stepped in, arrested us, had a paddy wagon there. Instantly, we were put in a paddy wagon, and we were being driven downtown. And the kid said, "You're bigger than I am." He was astonished that he could have gotten away with this, but I said, "Well, that's the beauty of nonviolence, is we're not interested in fighting you." And he couldn't get over that, and as a result, he became an informer. He worked for the restaurants. He heard what their strategy was, and he would call some of our people and tell us what they were planning, which just showed us in a little way. Anyway, and then that day, I do remember we were walking over to the restaurant, and John Lewis and I were together. I'm sure he does not remember this out of everything that's happened to him. But he said, "Malcolm," he said, "are you afraid?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he was too, of course, and that was an outstanding conversation, I recall. But that's pretty much it. And then I'm not quite sure what happened after that, but I think things started to come to a head. John Lawson, he was a student at Vanderbilt, and the Nashville Banner, the head of the Nashville Banner was on the board of Vanderbilt University, and he was making him the scapegoat. Jim Lawson, he was turning him into a vicious, scary, something or other, and got the chancellor to expel him from the divinity school. Mm. Well, when that happened, the divinity school faculty and a lot of us students all resigned en masse. And so that shifted my focus from that committee to where I'm no longer a student. Mm-hmm. And Northern seminaries came in and immediately offered every faculty person a job and every student we were accepted to go to Boston Theological Seminary. So somewhere in there, seems to me, and I don't quite remember, my focus shifted away from the committee to having to take care of my own needs. Mm-hmm. But then it settled, we got back into, we were reinstated at Vanderbilt. But I was no longer really involved in the movement, and I don't quite know what happened there or why.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was just the concern of having to deal with my own life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it just seemed the natural thing to do. That either you were going to support them or you weren't. I never became a true believer in the nonviolent movement, and that, you know, where I was going to live my life nonviolently. I never adopted. To me, it was a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I recall later, because Joseph, Mary's son, he interviewed me.
Mm-hmm.
He said, Malcolm, he said, how could you be involved in the nonviolent movement and then also go volunteer to go to Vietnam?
Mm-hmm.
It was a brilliant question. And I had never thought of it before, but it was because I was following the situation rather than following a principle.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting. It doesn't mean it was right or wrong. But that's my view of things.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's up to each individual where they are to make the ethical decision. You don't know ahead of time what that is. Well, the whole poverty issue,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the race, just the poverty of it. We could see so clearly
Mm-hmm.
what the society was doing to people and making it almost impossible for them to get out of a poor situation. And all the things that later came to be accepted as policy in terms of welfare and stuff, well, that was so visible to us back in the 50s
Mm-hmm.
and 60s. And those issues haven't changed. We still haven't fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
We're so afraid that somebody's going to get something for nothing. When we're always doing that for ourselves wherever we can. There's definitely been improvement. There's more involvement. There is a black middle class. That's all been to the good, but there is still the ghetto situation in every major city that no white person could withstand. It's depression level economics year in, year out for the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
The unemployment rate is higher than it was during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And if people live this way every day, it's just nonsense.
Just a survivalist.
Yeah.
You can't start to thrive because you're too busy surviving.
That's a good question. Of course, I've had this belief since 1968, and I've been wrong every year since then, but that the economy was going to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Totally, completely collapse. And that we would have to rebuild society from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And it would give us an opportunity to be creative, and that's one reason why we're involved in the community still. So I still think that's going to happen, and I think it's more imminent now than it's ever been, but it still keeps dragging on somehow. but that could confront them in ways that I've never had to confront life. So it could be a real test for them. But they chose to be here during this time, so if so, I'm sure they're up for it. No, it was just nice to have been in a situation where I got to know personally people who became historical figures. And again, I'm sure they don't remember me at this point, but they were truly people who just came and did a job and turned into historical personages.
Well, you were a part of that.
Yeah, I was lucky to be a part of it.